Hello and welcome to a breaking news edition of the Jet Fuel podcast. We already kind of thought this 2017 season was going to be a dismal one for the New York Jets. It just got a heck of a lot worse. Quincy Enunwa, the clear-cut number one wide receiver on this roster, has been placed on injured reserve with a neck injury. He's not definitely out for the year yet. The Jets have not ruled him out, but reports from ESPN's Adam Schefter and NFL Network's Mike Garafolo suggest that Enunwa will miss the entire season with a neck injury sustained during the green and white scrimmage. Our Max Marcilla was on the scene. He saw the injury occur. He basically missed a pass, fell down, hurt his neck, and it was sort of a re-aggravation of an injury he suffered during the spring that sort of limited him during off-season workouts. So I'm here with Max. I'm here with Adam Zalonka. We've got the three-headed monster here reacting live to this. Max, I'll start with you since you were there live. Did you think the injury suffered to Enunwa when you saw it occur? I don't know how much you saw from the stands, obviously. Did you think it was serious at the time? And, just how big of a blow is this for the Jets? Is there even a way to describe how monumental of a loss this is?
I mean, to answer the second part of your question, you really can't even – I mean, this is already one of, if not the worst roster in the NFL. And then you take away, I'd say, one of their top five players overall, definitely one of their two best weapons on offense with, Bilal Powell, maybe Matt Forte. You take out one of their best weapons on an already bad roster, and this is, in my opinion, undoubtedly the worst roster in the NFL, and I don't even think it's close. To answer the first part of your question about the injury, so I was watching the play as it happened and watching it develop. Basically what happened is Enunwa ran a slant route over the middle. He was lined up on the right side of the quarterback, far out, and ran a slant route over the middle. It was 1-on-1 or 7-on-7 drills, but he had 1-on-1 coverage, ran the slant, was near the goal line. I believe it was McCown, but that's the only part I'm not certain about. McCown or Hackenberg threw the pass. Enunwa couldn't haul it in. He dropped it, and he went down, and he kind of just stayed down for a bit. The trainers came out. He sat up. He stood up. He walked off on his own, trainers to either side of him. And Todd Bowles later said that it was just kind of the way he fell, and he landed on his neck. And it definitely didn't look good when it first happened because he didn't get up right away, because he kind of lied down a bit, and it took him a minute before he was able to sit up. But with neck injuries and with head injuries, on standing up and walking off, it's just a huge sigh of relief that it's nothing extremely serious, meaning like getting paralyzed or something like horrific like that. So even though it's such a serious injury that it holds him out for the entire year, it kind of was unknown at that point, the severity, because he was able to walk off, because they didn't need like a car or a stretcher or anything to take him off. So it was really just an unknown situation. And really for 48 hours since the injury, there was no clarity as to the severity of it until just now.
Adam, try and put this into context for people who, what do the Jets do from here? They really have no established weapons. And if you want to even call Enunwa established, that might be sort of a stretch because he's only played 1 year and produced. There is nothing behind this guy on the depth chart. The Jets deliberately did this. Can the Jets even replace the 56 receptions Enunwa had last year?
I don't know. Cecil Shorts is a free agent. Let me try to be as positive as possible. Free agents. And Anquan Boldin, of course, just signed with the division rival Buffalo Bills earlier today. I think that that's not a bad signing at all for Buffalo, considering their lack of depth at the position. Boldin, although he had career lows last year and is 37 years old now, is still a very reliable receiver who's available, who can replace 56 receptions. I've been searching ever since the Jets this news came across the wire, and like I said, Cecil Shorts. I'll name
That's
some
the
other
best you could find.
The best receivers I'll name you: Brian Hartline, Stevie Johnson.
Oh my goodness.
Marquez Colston. I was always a big fan of him. He went to Hofstra like Wayne Corbett. Hakeem Nicks and James Jones. You want any of them? I don't know if the Jets want any of them. The Jets put themselves in this position where one injury spells doom for an entire unit, because unit looks so much more unproven, so much less proven without Quincy Enunwa. And like you just pointed out, that's saying something about the Jets roster, because Enunwa only became an established weapon, and I hesitate. I want to use air quotes on weapon. He's a good receiver as of last year. He had one productive season. It was his third in the league, I believe. First productive season in the wake of Eric Decker's injury last year. The Jets are now entering the season with Robbie Anderson as their potential number one receiver. And while Anderson was a feel-good story this year, he's not ready for the best cornerbacks in the league. And to put this back in your mind, he did get arrested in April. And we still don't know if he's going to face any sort of charge or from the NFL a suspension on that.
True.
In the very worst case scenario, if Robbie Anderson gets suspended, the rest of the Jets depth chart is our Darius Stewart and Chad Hansen, the 3rd and 4th round draft picks, rookies who have not seen NFL defenses or coverage yet, as well as Sharon Peak, Jalen Marshall, Marquess Wilson, Devin Street, and Lucky Whitehead. This is the bottom of the barrel, essentially, in terms of receiver talent. To be fair, those names I read earlier, those current free agents, they're all on the older side for the most part, and they're all slightly more established. They've all had varying degrees of success in the league, but why do the Jets want to sign talented players at this point? They just went from, like Max pointed out, debatably one of the worst teams, rosters talent-wise in the NFL, to, without a debate, without a doubt, undisputedly the worst team in the NFL. It's weird that one guy like Quincy Enunwa makes that much of a difference. And yeah, you can still say, well, the Jets' front seven is all right when you consider the defensive line on the other end of the spectrum. But no, this is just a grim, gray day for Jets fans who were hoping they would win a game this year, because that's been thrown into question if the Jets can even scrape out one win.
Right, and here's the thing, Adam. You mentioned earlier a bunch of those veteran receivers, and yeah, there are a couple names, and they produced. I know Colston had a couple good years in New Orleans, and James Jones in Green Bay, whatever. But the Jets,
I like James Jones.
The Jets have made it clear they want to go young. I mean, that's why they cut Eric Decker. That's why they cut Brandon Marshall. That's why they got rid of pretty much everyone on their roster above the age
precisely.
So they want to go young. But I know, Matt, we've talked about this before, even before the Enunwa injury. How young is too young? And are you putting players in an unfair situation? You look at Christian Hackenberg. You want to determine whether he's the quarterback of the future. Well, I mean, he's not really going to have many weapons outside of Marquess Wilson, who has had 4 years in the NFL. This is year number 5.
And he's always injured.
And he's always injured. But listen to outside of Wilson, no one on the Jets roster has more than 3 years of experience. And those guys, Frankie Hammond, who's more of a special teams player, Chris Harper, who hasn't really stuck around ever. He had a nice catch in the green-white scrimmage, and that's his extent of his workload with the Jets. Mm-hmm. Lucky Whitehead, not practice squad, a special teams guy, and Miles White. None of those guys are proven, and those are the most experienced players. They have a couple rookies. You mentioned the guys they drafted, Stewart and Chad Hansen. Couple second-year guys. You got Jalen Marshall, Sharon Peak. But, I mean, this roster, these wide receivers, it's really just a mixed bag of unproven guys who just have no expectations, really.
Yeah, those guys that you named who have 3 years of experience in the NFL are largely camp bodies and return specialists. Not journeymen necessarily, but guys who've bounced around a little bit and haven't really been featured in regular season games much at all, except in a return capacity like a Bruce Ellington or a Lucky Whitehead. And the same goes for Sharon Peak. Jalen Marshall.
Ellington, the Jets did try to make a move with at least another guy listed as a wide receiver, although you said Ellington's more of a kick returner. But he's not on the team anymore. He failed his physical. He tore his hamstring last year. Jalen Marshall, here's another guy we talked about on our last week's podcast. He has a 4-game suspension. We talked about on that show how it could be not a good thing. You never want to see a guy get suspended, but it could give the Jets an opportunity to pick and choose who they want as their punt returner. Well, guess what? Now all of a sudden you might need him to catch passes, and he's out for a quarter of the season. It's going to put guys who have hardly played at the NFL level, let alone as a wide receiver, a guy like Lucky Whitehead, a guy like you said, Robbie Anderson. He's had one good year, and he's an undrafted free agent in his second year. He will be asked to be the number one guy. You look at this roster, I think it's hard to argue that Robbie Anderson, there is someone more qualified to be a number one wide receiver than Robbie Anderson.
Exactly. And yet he's not ready for the best cornerbacks in the league.
I'm saying.
Yeah. Anderson's not only is he not ready for the best cornerbacks in the league to be covering him, Anderson is definitely the worst number one receiver on any depth chart at this point in the preseason. 100% guarantee it. Because he benefited last year from facing nickel and dime coverage as a third or fourth guy to Marshall and Enunwa, and he caught, I think, 2 touchdowns in December. Maybe that's Jalen Marshall's stats I'm mixing up with Anderson's. He was a great story a year ago, but he really it's like we have to rely a ton on Anderson all of a sudden, which I don't know if I trust that.
I'll tell you what, though, if we're looking for reasons for optimism, and of course in news like this there are very few. Yeah. I know the Jets are really trying to give their young guys experience, and that of course will have to happen now. A little bit by choice. They did cut Marshall and Decker, but also without Enunwa, it just puts more pressure on these young guys. With Marshall's suspension, with the injury to Enunwa, Chad Hansen, Ardarius Stewart, they are going to get significant reps week 1 of their rookie season. The 3rd and 4th round picks who are going to be possibly starting the first game of their NFL career. But the other position group I would say this actually benefits is the tight end position. I think Austin Seferian-Jenkins and Jordan Leggett will benefit as far as reps and targets.
So it benefits an even crappier position.
Honestly, at this point, the tight end position might be better than the Jets wide receiver group, and that's saying something. It'll be interesting to see, and obviously a lot of people say, there were reports of the new offensive coordinator, John Morton, he runs a West Coast offense or something. But to be completely fair, we really don't know that. He's only been in a position to be like a wide receiver coach or something. He's never actually called offensive plays. So it is the first time we're going to see that this year. But you would have to expect he would at least utilize tight ends more than Chan Gailey, who's with the Jets last year, because anyone could utilize tight ends more than he would. So I think it does give Seferian-Jenkins and Leggett opportunities to see more targets, to get more reps, just because there's, one fewer weapon. But this is not, breaking news. All of a sudden the Jets' great wide receiver core is now bad. This was a not very good unit that just lost its best player. The young guys are going to have to step up. They will be getting as good of an opportunity as any of them will have in their career. You get rookies who will start week 1 who probably wouldn't start on any other team in the NFL. It's a great opportunity for them. The question is, well, how much will they grow from it? Will it stunt their growth playing against the best cornerbacks in the game? You wouldn't imagine so, but also, football's a big mental game. How does it knock their confidence if they come out and struggle, if the team loses a couple games? It's a talentless roster, and these guys have a lot to prove.
Yeah, and one thing you guys didn't even mention in speaking of the rest of these guys on the depth chart is, one of those rookies you're kind of banking on, Ardarius Stewart. Don't forget he's coming off of a pair of surgeries too. Underwent groin and thumb surgeries in the spring, in June, or May or June. So, that's another guy you were hoping for some decent production from, and he's not even fully healthy right now, and he's coming off of a couple injuries. Robbie Anderson, yeah, nice story. 42 receptions, 587 yards, 2 touchdowns. As an undrafted free agent, given the opportunity, that was pretty good, especially considering just how disastrous the year was. Him and Enunwa were 2 of the brighter spots on that Jets offense, which was just simply dismal last year. I really think this does a disservice to the quarterbacks too. I know obviously the tight ends are going to be used more. They sort of have to be just by switching offensive coordinators and shoving Chan Gailey out the door. But this really, really does a disservice to the quarterbacks. And if you're asking me right now, what are the odds that Christian Hackenberg proves himself and emerges as a legitimate or a decent option at quarterback? I would say it's less than 10%, because not only is he underdeveloped and he's still struggling with the nuances of learning an NFL offense, he will get thrown into the fire at some point. It's going to happen. I've said it's going to happen right after the bye week. He might get those last 6 games of the regular season as more of an audition more than anything else. And he's going – and, I mean, we're not even factoring in the possibility of injuries over, 10, 12, 8 games, however long it takes for him to come in. This wide receiver core could be even more depleted by the time Hackenberg eventually gets his shot. So if fans are looking at this season and saying, well, we got to see what we have in Hackenberg. I still believe in him. He could emerge. It's not a done deal that they're drafting a quarterback at the top of the draft in 2018 just yet. All I have to say is, how can you honestly think that? This is not a receiver group that is going to make any quarterback better. In fact, it's going to make even Josh McCown, a veteran, much worse, I think. I don't think Robbie Anderson's going to meet up to the challenge. I hope he does for the sake of this offense, for the sake of Todd Bowles' job. But it's not going to happen. And you don't even know how Quincy Enunwa was going to respond from being sort of a nice, versatile piece in an offense to the guy that defenses scheme against. I think you're going to see a lot of throwing to the running backs. I think Matt Forte is going to see a lot more catches out of the backfield, another stupid Chandeli scheme. You wouldn't use Powell in third down situations, Forte in third down situations, which is sort of what he made a career on almost. I think you're going to see a lot more running backs. I think you're going to see a lot more tight ends. You might not see nearly as many 3 wide receiver sets anymore. Certainly not as many as the Gailey-led Jets. This is just a mess. This offense is terrible. It's just terrible. And I posted the link if you're watching us live on YouTube. We appreciate it. A friend of the show, Christopher Chavez, asking, "Do you miss Eric Decker?" And, this is a good point to sort of end this little live reaction here. Max sort of alluded to it, going young, but did they go too young? And I didn't really like how the Jets handled the Decker and the David Harris departures. Adam, obviously hindsight's 2020, you can't predict injuries, but are the Jets just sort of shooting themselves in the foot here by not just, not just like getting younger, but gutting the roster? Is this something that will take them from maybe a 2 or 3, maybe 4-win team to they're shooting for maybe a win or 2, if that?
Yeah, I said it before. We can't expect the Jets to win a game. As far as Decker, you went a little all over the place, so let me try to answer all of that. Eric Decker would be the best offensive player on this roster if the Jets had kept him.
He's a reliable veteran. You know what I mean? And he's going to cost you something, but he's somebody that Christian Hackenberg can rely upon when you put him in. That's all I'm saying.
Getting younger doesn't mean getting rid of every single useful veteran you have, because getting younger is not something you can just flip a switch and do that in the course of one off season where you have to get rid of everybody who's 29 years old or older, anybody who's in their 30s. Injuries aside, because as we've shown this weekend and today with Enunwa, they're unpredictable and you don't know when they're going to strike. But no, Decker would be wonderful to have right now. You could put him back at the number 1 slot. Honestly, Matt Forte should be the number 1 receiver on the depth chart right now. They should just use him as a receiver full time and have Powell be the feature back. Why not? What do you do? What do you do? So
you gotta get creative.
Yeah, you know what? My new thing. After I looked at the free agent receivers, I went to the Cleveland Browns depth chart, and their receivers, if you want to start there, are Kenny Britt and Corey Coleman. Their tight end is Gary Barnidge. They have their quarterbacks are Cody Kessler, Brock Osweiler, and Deshaun Kaiser, which I would argue are better than the Jets' current quarterbacks. Their running backs are Isaiah Crowell and Duke Johnson, which I don't know if you want to take or leave them. You always have Joe Thomas as a stalwart left tackle. Their defense has Myles Garrett now, has Jabril Peppers, has Calvin Pryor, has Jamie Collins. I think the Browns are a better team than the Jets. And when the Jets and Browns play each other later this season, in the regular season, we'll find out who's a better team that day on the field. That could be the worst football game in years. The worst NFL game in years.
I'm laughing because it's sad but true.
On paper, I would take the Browns. I mean, the Jets have definitely the better defensive line. And
that's about it.
I think they have the better safeties, but again, that's buying into the hype of 2 rookies. And other than that, I mean, running backs, I think the Jets might have a slight edge because I'm a big Bilal Powell guy. But offense as a whole, I mean, Cleveland certainly has the better weapons. Corey Coleman would be the number one receiver on the Jets. Barnage would be probably the number one tight end. I mean, I probably think all three of their quarterbacks are better than Josh McCown. Whatever you want to say about Hackenberg and Petty. I mean, Josh McCown's a 38-year-old journeyman. You know what you're going to get out of him, and that's not very much. Look, this is a talentless roster, and the young guys will get opportunities. I do think to an extent, and again, hindsight is 2020, I was all for the Jets going younger, giving these young guys opportunities. So I would be wrong here too in this situation. But if Christian Hackenberg comes out and he starts, like Matt said, whenever he comes out and plays and he looks bad, all the questions and all the people who want Christian Hackenberg to be very good, well, they're going to say, how can you expect him to come out with nothing and be good? I mean, you remember we saw that with Geno Smith the other year when he was leading the 5 or 6 win Jets who had no weapons.
Wasn't that Decker's first year in 2014?
Right. And they had Percy Harvin for a little bit. And I mean, just a handful of proven, young, unknown, not talented receivers. And people were trying to give Geno Smith the benefit of the doubt because he didn't have any weapons. Well, I don't think the Jets want to be in that same situation where this year is so much about what do we have in Christian Hackenberg. And then next year, if the Jets have the number 1 pick and they have their pick at a few quarterbacks who could all be very good, and the Jets still don't know what they have in Hackenberg, I think that's a situation the Jets don't want to be in. And as the year goes along, I think the fear is with the lack of talent, that might be more and more likely.
Yeah, it's not fair to Christian Hackenberg, and it's unfortunate. It's not fair to Hackenberg. It's not fair to Todd Bowles. Guys who really need, to show something this season. It's really not. It's an enormous disadvantage too. But I think this whole offseason purge has been with the thought of getting that franchise quarterback. I think that's what they've been aiming for. I think that's the goal in mind. And Christian Hackenberg will get a shot. The odds will be stacked against him whenever he gets that shot. But I think when push comes to shove, if the Jets are picking number 1 overall, unless Christian Hackenberg amazes you and throws for 400 yards in a game and 15 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, I don't think just being decent or serviceable is going to get it done. And I think the Jets, their goal is to get that franchise quarterback. I think they are admitting failure on the Hackenberg pick. They're going to give him a chance. It's going to go badly. If you have hope in Christian Hackenberg at this point, given his poor development already, his slow development, I should say, and just this team around him, it's a disaster. Let's end with this. Let's try and end with something positive. Real quick, give me one receiver who you think can maybe emerge because of this injury, who can maybe it could be someone who goes from being a fringe roster guy to now maybe making the 53. It can be a guy who you think is going to, maybe not assume Enunwa's role, but maybe replace some of that production he leaves behind. Max, why don't you start?
Real quick before I give my answer, I just want to say that's actually where I disagree with you on the Hackenberg front. I don't think the releasing of the veterans or anything means that the Jets are admitting it's a failure. I just think they put him in a pretty bad position, but I think the Jets are still holding out hope. I mean, that's why they went out and they got Josh McCown, a veteran that isn't going to do very much. That's why they tried to purge the roster without any playoff expectations, so there'd be no pressure to keep the veteran in like Ryan Fitzpatrick. I think the Jets are ready to look and see what they have in Hackenberg. I don't think they're ready to admit that it's a failure. I certainly don't think, though, that they've put him in a fair position to succeed. Now, to answer your question, I'm gonna take the bailout answer. I'm not going to go with the wide receiver, although if I had to, I would say one of the rookies, either Chad Hansen or Ardarius Stewart. I'm going to go with the tight ends. I think Safarian Jenkins, when he comes back from his 2-game suspension, and Jordan Leggett will be the 2 biggest beneficiaries from this injury. Not really that they would benefit a ton. I still think they would have larger roles in the offense. But look, there's going to be fewer targets, fewer weapons with Enunwa out, and you're going to need more players to catch the ball. And I think the two tight ends will see bigger roles than, let's say, they would have seen under a Changeli offense.
Adam, who you got?
Matt Forte. My answer is now less subversive because Max went to a tight end position. I thought I was going to be clever by going with the running back, but the more I think about this, the more it makes sense. Matt Forte has more pass catching talent and ability and experience, years and years of experience catching the football from all over the field. He doesn't just run out of the backfield. The Bears would line him up sometimes as a receiver. He has more of that than anybody else on this roster as a running back by label. His label is a running back, but he can do both. And if he can get back from this ankle thing and stay healthy for 16 games, he might end up being the Jets' leading receiver when it's all said and done.
That was going to be our next question. I'll quickly say Sharon Peak. Sort of, so, I'll take a receiver soon. Yeah. He showed you a little bit at the end of the season, finished his rookie year with 19 receptions, 186 yards. He sort of flashed a little bit during the preseason. The talent is evident. They took a flyer on him in the 7th round. I think it's just asking a lot for a couple of rookies, especially one coming off of groin and thumb surgeries, to sort of step in and make an immediate impact. I think we've sort of had our expectations skewed at the wide receiver position in general because of guys like Odell Beckham and just all of these impact players who come in as rookies and are really stars. That's not the norm, especially when you get later in the draft. So I'm not expecting our Darius Stewart or Chad Hansen to really break out. They could be solid. They could be reliable. Maybe they'll surprise me, but I think it's just a lot to ask for. It's one of those tougher positions to adjust to going from college to the next level. So I say Pete because I think he's one of the few players other than maybe Robbie Anderson with any sort of upside. Maybe Jalen Marshall, but that 4-game suspension it really hurts. And, given the fluidity of this roster, someone could step into whatever role Jalen Marshall has if he makes the roster and, sort of assume it and seize it from him during those 4 games. I mean, it's just I can't place a bet on a guy who's going to miss a quarter of the season, especially with how awful this roster is and where someone could step in off the street tomorrow and be a more viable option. So I will go Sharon Peak. He started today's practice, lined up on the outside with Robbie Anderson. So I think he's getting thrown into that number 2 receiver role. And I think he might have the most upside of all the receivers not rookies on this roster. All right, real quick, and then we really will end this. Who's the leading receiver for the Jets this year? Adam, are you going to go with Forte?
I would very happily go with Forte on that question, yes.
Okay. In terms of just receptions, I'm saying. So you think Forte?
Receptions, receiving yards is usually, when you're measuring a leading receiver, it's generally, well, I guess it could be either.
I'll go catches. We'll go catches for the sake of it. Yards are very fluky and tough to predict.
If I were coaching the team, I would make sure that Forte has more receptions than anybody on that depth chart, and the receivers or the tight ends, just because I would believe in Forte's pass catching ability above Robbie Anderson and Safarian Jenkins. So yeah, I want to go with Forte. If you really put a gun to my head, made me answer seriously, I guess Robbie Anderson. I'll say Robbie Anderson is more likely to be the leading receiver than Forte.
Okay, Max.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would go Anderson also. I would consider going Safarian Jenkins. I would consider going I don't know, Sharon P. I don't know. It's a mixed bag. I would consider Forte or Powell for that matter. You really don't know. I'll go Anderson because it's the safest bet, but nothing is safe with this unit.
I'll go Robbie Anderson too. I do think Sharon Peak will be a guy to watch. And I like Adam's rationale on Forte. I mean, he is a natural pass catcher. Obviously, he is a running back, but you can line him out as a receiver. I think that's totally fine. I think the Jets will be checking the ball down quite a bit this year, so that could obviously help the running backs and the tight ends. I'll go with Anderson just because he's the number 1 receiver, and someone's going to get targets. The Jets are going to have to throw at some point, but I will go with Robbie Anderson. So that'll wrap up our very somber recap to the Quincy Enunwa news. In case you're jumping in late on this live YouTube video, he is out for the season, according to reports. with a neck injury that he suffered during the green and white scrimmage during 7-on-7 drills. And you can always listen back to hear Max Marcilla's description of what exactly happened. He was live at MetLife Stadium for that game. I was planning to do a podcast to sort of talk about the green and white scrimmage, but this news is just sort of taken over. So Max, we'll have to have people check out the website nyjetfield.com to read your takeaways piece from the green and white scrimmage. It feels like eons ago with all the tragic news happening today. But I want to thank Max Marcilla. I want to thank Adam Zelanka for jumping on and joining me on this Monday afternoon. Appreciate you guys as always. Give them a follow on Twitter. You can follow Adam at Adam_Zelanka. You can follow Max at mmarcilla98. Feel free to throw me a follow too at Real Matt Barbato. And of course, if you haven't already, follow Jet Fuel on Twitter at New York Jet Fuel. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast. And check us out on nyjetfuel.com. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Whatever you're doing, we always appreciate you. And this has been a Jet Fuel podcast.